Like we'll go ahead and start. I think as people pop in, they'll catch up. And it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the EdInnovate Summit. And we are EdInnovate 22. And we are here as for this Jacobs Institute for Innovation, and San Diego County Office of Ed is sponsoring that as well. So thank you for being here. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Not only is she one of our esteemed visionary speakers, but she's also a dear friend of mine, and I'm so grateful to be here. Anytime I could be in her space, I'm grateful to that. So it's my pleasure to introduce Paulette Delen, and I'll read her bio, and she's going to be speaking about being bold, and it's okay to be a little bit scared. And I'll read her bio now. And in June of 2016, Paulette Delen was elected to the San Diego County San Diego County Board of Education. The San Diego County Office of Education serves the county's most vulnerable students and supports school leaders, teachers, and more than 500,000 students. Paulette Delen has more than 20 years of experience working in technology and education. Currently, she's living the dream, working at Lego Education, which offers playful learning experiences and teaching solutions based on Lego systems of bricks. In addition to her technology and volunteer background, Donnellon served 9 years in the U.S. Army and was deployed during Desert Storm. She is an active community member and is an award-winning nature photographer. And I will add one more thing. I was her son's teacher when I was teaching fourth grade many years ago, probably 9 years ago. So again, it's my absolute deepest pleasure to introduce Paulette Delen.
Well, thank you, Erin. It's and it's great to have you introduce me. It's like we've known each other forever. But I'm happy to be here today, and thank you for asking to be here today. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to start off with a story, and actually I have a few stories I'm going to share with you this morning. And the first one is that I'm a wildlife photographer in my spare time. And you're going to see some of my images today. In fact, the one that you see on the screen is one of my images that I just took. And it's currently, I shouldn't say I just took it, but it's currently on display at the San Diego County Fair. So I do love photographing the burrowing owls down by the Salton Sea, which is located by the southeast corner of California. And a lot of folks don't even know that this large body of water exists here, and yet it's the largest body of water in inland California. The Salton Sea supports one of the most diverse avian compositions in the United States, as well as a host of endangered and other wildlife species. And this area also supports a lot of agriculture. And farmers in the Imperial County, they grow about 80% of our nation's winter crops. And this includes lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, sweet corn, onions. I can always smell the onions as I drive by them on the dirt roads. But all of that said, 70% of the burrowing owl population in California resides in the south end of the Salton Sea. And you can see that here, kind of down here on the bottom part of this slide here. So when I photograph these birds, I'm always in a vehicle, and this acts as a blind. And on this particular day, I had spotted an owl as I was driving down one of these dirt roads by the fields. And I slowly pulled up and I started photographing it. And when I was done, I set my camera down, and lo and behold, just under the side view mirror, there was an owl directly in front of me, like literally 5 feet in front of me. And I almost had too much telephoto lens as I was looking at it. And we were pretty much eye to eye. But this little bird stood its ground and it just stared at me. And nature is a quintessential fight or flight, right? And so a lot of times these little guys will definitely literally take flight. But this one just faced me, and it felt like it was daring me. And this owl was bold, and we sat there together as I observed it for close to 5 minutes. And not only did I observe it, I photographed it, as you can see here. But when I was done, I slowly drove away and found this little guy, watched this little guy fly over by its companion that I had originally started photographing. So for your takeaways today, I'm going to speak to you about my hopes, what makes me joyful, and how do I drive innovation. And I look forward to sharing my story with you, because that's a lot of what this is going to be about, is my story and how my experiences, hard work, and perseverance got me to where I am today. And I did this through creating my own personal mission statement. And hopefully I'll be able to inspire you to come up with your own tools to use as you take your path through life. So to get great wildlife images, you have to be just a little scared and a lot bold. And this is me next to my car. And you have to be a lot bold because it's putting yourself out there and it's hugging the car and it's being close to the driver's side just in case you need to jump in. And it's also, standing your ground and knowing your surroundings. But you also need to know the risks. And most of all, it's all about the rewards because there wasn't just one ram walking towards me. There were two that were coming in my direction. And the good news is neither of them had any interest in me, and they were mostly interested in the tasty looking greens on the other side of the road. Unfortunately, they're herbivores because as you can see, you don't want to mess with these horns. And, I've actually seen them use them during rutting season, and they're pretty powerful animals. I've also learned with wildlife photography that you have to be bold enough to put yourself out there. And I remember when I started to take these images, they weren't so great. In fact, they were pretty bad. But I was super proud of these images and I submitted them to all sorts of contests. And then I started to get the denial letters, sorry, you didn't make it to the next tier, or those types of things. So what I took from that is I learned how to start shooting in raw format and how to do post-processing. And you can see those results in this particular image. And it won a national monthly contest. And my favorite time of the day to shoot these owls is in the morning just before the sun rises. Because as you can see here, their pupils are fully dilated with just a little rim of yellow on the outside. And this makes the owls look totally adorable. And this particular owl was a juvenile. So as my shutter was clicking, it tilted its head at the noise. What I've also learned as I've immersed myself in this hobby is it allows me to be alone in my thoughts and it puts me in the moment. It actually clears my head. It's what I call my morning cup of coffee or my late afternoon pick me up, because the best time to see wildlife, of course, is an early morning or late afternoon, early evening, which is perfect for my mini therapy sessions. I call this my mini therapy sessions for so many reasons. And I've become in tune with nature so much that I have be able to recognize bird calls. I could tell you what kind of bird it was before I even saw it. And also birds are pretty amazing as they'll alert me to anything that is amiss, such as a coyote walking towards me on the same path as I am, as evidenced by the image on the bottom right hand of the slide. However, once I see these creatures, it's game on for both of us because I'm their paparazzi and I've arrived. So not only is nature beautiful, it's magnificent, and nature is giving, and nature is an incredible teacher. And I've learned a lot because nature is bold and it's just a little bit scared, as evidenced by this owl in flight. In this particular image, actually, I'm going to share with you, just won a national award. I cannot share with you with who yet because I've been asked to keep it on the down low until they formally announce it. But hopefully you'll get to see it on the CBS Morning News here pretty soon, which is very exciting. So when you're younger, most of you, I'm sure, have dreamed of this pathway. It's that straight line. I did when I was young. And I would dream about my life plan. And that life plan included a family with 2 kids, a dog and a cat, a great career, lots of money. And when I was younger, I was also a voracious reader. I read about the perfect family. I wanted my life to be just like the ones in the books that I read. And I think I read every Nancy Drew mystery that was out there. And if you remember the Bobbsey twins or the Donna Parker series, those were a favorite of mine as well. So it's easy to assume that this happens for others. But books are books, and you know what? Life is life, and life isn't all butterflies and unicorns. And so reality sets in, and you have your peaks and your valleys as you take your journey. And my valleys included being in a foster home when I was 8 years old. Then there was my 20s where I was barely staying afloat. And I'm sure some of you can relate to some of these. And then, there were jobs that were not the right fit. But then I had my peaks, and my peaks included meeting my husband, birthing and raising my 2 sons. And right now I'm feeling really good about my life in general, and hopefully I didn't jinx it by saying that. So my story started off in Canada. I was actually born in St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada. And my mom had me when she was 17 years old. Right after me came my brother. And as a young mother, she raised us for a few short years, and then her priorities changed. She became more interested in boys, motorcycles, and drugs. So she told our father that we were all his. Unfortunately, our father lived in a boarding house, and he couldn't have kids there with him. So my brother and I were placed in a foster home in the countryside just outside of Stratford, Ontario. One day when I was 8 years old and my brother was 7, our lives changed forever. I had come home from school and was doing homework in the kitchen with my foster sister, Mary. We decided that we were thirsty and we poured ourselves a glass of water. But then we wanted to be fancy, so we decided we needed ice cubes for our water. So I went to the freezer to grab the ice tray. And what I had forgotten was just that past weekend, we had picked some wild elderberries, which is a small, delicate, dark purple berry, and put them in the freezer. So when I opened it up, hundreds of small elderberries fell out and rolled onto the floor. I was horrified. So I went to grab a broom to sweep them up, and Mary went to guard the doorway to the kitchen so that Sherry, our older foster sister that was babysitting us, wouldn't notice. She was actually kind of mean, and we didn't want to make her angry, and we didn't want to alert her to the situation that was going on in the kitchen. So as I started to sweep up the elderberries, much to my dismay, the small, delicate little berries started to smear all over the floor, and then panic set in. During this time, Mary and I were so involved that we missed hearing a knock on the front door. And that's when Sherry came to the kitchen door, and I could see Mary jumping all around to block her view. But Sherry didn't care about Mary jumping around, nor did she care about what was going on in the kitchen. And she was focused on me to announce that someone was at the door asking for me. Mind you, we lived in the middle of the country, so we didn't get a lot of people coming to the door. So when I went to the front door, there stood my natural mother, with whom I hadn't seen in a really long time, with my 8-year-old brother in her arms. And all I could process was my brother's too big to be held. And then she looked at me and asked if I wanted to go to California to see my grandparents. And I said, yes, of course, anything to get out of the elderberry mess in the kitchen. So off my brother and I went with just a few small toys in our lunch boxes and the clothes on our back. And that was the last time we saw our natural mother until about 4 years ago, when we were notified their health was declining. So my brother and I went to visit her one last time 40 something years later. But that day, when we left the foster home, we flew alone, my brother and I, from Toronto to Los Angeles on L-1011 on our very first airplane flight. And when we arrived in Los Angeles, the captain of the plane walked my brother and I down the air stairs into the arms of our future parents. Yes, our grandparents adopted us 3 years later. And shortly after that, we became US citizens. I enlisted in the US Army while I was in high school, and I entered basic training when I was 17. My folks actually signed the papers to allow me to go. I turned 18 while I was there, and that's me looking exhausted on the left side of the picture, learning how to use a field radio. I became a single parent when I was 19, and I loved my son with all of my heart, and I knew that I needed to provide for him. I struggled to make ends meet. I was in the Army Reserves, and it was in 1991 that I was activated to go to Desert Storm. The night I left for Desert Storm was the hardest thing I've ever done. I had to leave my 3-year-old son, Michael, behind. And while I was driving Michael to the caregiver that would be watching him while I was away, it briefly entered my mind that I would just keep driving to Mexico and live there. But then I had a responsibility, and I fulfilled that responsibility. And while I was at Desert Storm, I wrote to Michael every single day. I still have those letters saved up in a box here in the closet. And I've had some moments while I was in Saudi Arabia where I saw Patriot missiles intercept Scud missiles directly above me. It was a scary time. And the picture you see here was when I returned home from Desert Storm, and the first time that I held him. Michael turned 4 while I was away. And that 4-year-old you see in this picture is now an 8th grade science teacher in Bonsall Unified School District. And I couldn't be prouder. So back in 1987, I had an old XT computer with a 1200 baud modem. It was gifted to me as there was no way I could afford one on my own. This allowed me to dial into BBSs. And these were bulletin board systems that were hosted by individuals in their homes. This was pre-World Wide Web. I even hosted my own BBS, and I was the only female sysop, or system operator, in San Diego County. And through my newfound community of friends, and actually we were nerds and we were very proud of it, I was offered my first technology job at Daytel Systems in 1988. I didn't own a car, so I was getting up early. I'd walk a block to the nearest bus stop with Michael in a stroller. I'd ride the bus for about 30 minutes, transfer to another bus, ride another 30 minutes, get dropped off, walk a mile to Michael's daycare, drop him off, then put on my Sony Walkman and walk the final 1.5 miles to work. And then I would repeat that process going back home after work. And as I worked hard and kept providing for Michael all during this time, I started to get offers to work at other computer companies. I saved up my money and I was able to buy my first car, and eventually I ended up at CompUSA. and I became the account rep that worked with the local schools. And then it happened. In 1998, I had my inflection moment, and that moment changed the course of my life. So Jeff Felix, and some of you may recognize his name, he's a retired superintendent from Coronado Unified School District. But in 1998, Jeff Felix was the superintendent at San Pasqual Union School District. He came into CompUSA and was interested in setting up a program so that all of his sixth graders would have laptop computers for school. So it was considered anytime, anywhere learning. So not only in the classroom, they would have these laptop computers, but in between classes and at home. And in 1998, this was huge out of the box thinking. But what it did was it allowed me to start thinking creatively about ways in which we could support students in the classroom to make learning fun. I gave myself permission to be innovative and to be bold and to make suggestions. I found my North Star, my own personal mission statement. But what I really found was hope, and along with that came my joy. And I started working exclusively with schools and school districts, and this is what propelled my career. So in speaking of my personal mission statement, I followed my passions. And what was it that brought me joy? So education was a big passion of mine. I love to think outside of the box and share my ideas with others. Then there were Lego bricks. My brother would get Lego bricks and model cars when we were little. I always wished for these things. So when I became an adult, I still wanted to be a kid, don't we all? And I bought myself Lego sets. My kids would get them for me for Christmas, and I was what you would call an AFOL, an adult fan of Lego. And then finally, there was my photography. I love taking pictures. So in following my North Star, in 2016, I was elected to the San Diego County Board of Education. I was able to build upon my dream to support students with out-of-the-box thinking. And in 2019, my vision came to fruition when the Innovation Division was created at the San Diego County Office of Education. With the Lego bricks and education, with the Lego bricks, I remember as I was in one of those valleys of despair, building with my Lego bricks, wondering if there was a job in which I could work with Lego bricks and education all at once. Much to my surprise, I discovered that there was a Lego education. And the dream came to a reality when representatives recruited me while I was at an education conference. Putting yourself in the right place at the right time has something to do with it, and possibly just plain old dumb luck. And as I pursued my photography, I discovered that I love photographing nature, and in particular wildlife. This passion takes me to places where I'm completely alone with nature, and this allows me to clear my head, marvel in what is around me, and observe Mother Nature. It's crazy to me that I'm now a national award-winning nature and wildlife photographer. So just a couple of quick pictures, and of course the little dog in the background is barking, but because of my dreams, this is, Lego has brought me to Denmark. Never in my wildest dreams did I know that I was going to go to the home of Lego in Billund, Denmark. And this is actually the Lego house. And what I've also got here is, because I work at Lego and Lego education, I created my own mini me out of Lego. And this is me with my camera as a nature and wildlife photographer. And it's just kind of great that it includes, it's got Lego, education, and my photography all in one here. So how did I achieve my personal mission statement? Well, first there was a checklist. And how many of you like lists? I actually love lists. I need them, and I rely on them more than ever. And I make shopping lists. I make to-do lists. I have inventory lists. I have a brainstorming list. I have a bucket list. And seriously, so many things I've yet to do. I really want to go, one of those things is I want to go to the Galapagos Islands and photograph the wildlife there. And I actually have lists to keep track of lists. Actually, I'm just kidding about that. But my most important list is the checklist, and that's my life list. And my life list is a list that I use when I need comfort, when I'm stressed, and when I'm scared. I defer to it when I'm worried about the next step I'm taking. And my life list includes my family and knowing that it's still intact. I have my home and a place to sleep with a roof over my head. I'm blessed to have my friends who are always there for me. And pets, they give us the greatest comfort. My dog is my best friend who loves me unconditionally. He's here to greet me when I come home, or he's in the office with me under my desk or behind me on the couch, keeping me company and keeping me sane. And currently, He's here under my desk, keeping me company. It's actually on the side of me right here. And then finally, yep, I'm still functioning as a full-fledged adult and my heart is still beating. So how many of you have come up with your own life list, the list you defer to when you feel like everything is crashing around you? This list grounds me. This not only works for me professionally, but personally as well. And it doesn't have to be everything all at once. It can be just 1 or 2 items that help me stay grounded. I just recently underwent transitioning my mother to an assisted care living facility. And it was a pretty traumatic, well, it is a pretty traumatic time for me. Moving my mother from the home I grew up in, getting ready to place that home on the market, and then myself changing roles and becoming the parent in our relationship. But during this time, it would go, I keep going back to my list. I could call my family for support, my friends for a shoulder, and this life list is my anchor. So speaking of my life list, never in my wildest dreams did I expect to jump out of an airplane. My palms sweat just thinking about it. But when the opportunity presented itself and it was presented that I would be jumping out of a plane with our country's most elite jumpers, the U.S. Army Golden Knights, I jumped at the chance, pun intended. I'll never forget the moment that we were leaning outside of the plane, looking down on Earth and literally, briefly losing my breath after my foot left the floor of the plane and we started plummeting down towards Earth. I initially had my eyes closed because what had I done? But then my thoughts were like, why? Open up your eyes and look. And well, just check out that view below me. I was in the moment, it was happening, and there was nothing I could do about it but enjoy it. So I embraced this moment. And when I landed on the ground, my life list was still intact, especially that beating heart thing. So be bold and do something makes you a little bit scared. And this was exactly that. Not only do I have my list to get me through life, I have my own set of rules that help contribute to my successes. Rule number 1 is to never be afraid to try something new. And this is on my bulletin board in my office. This has been on it for over 20 years. Never be afraid to try something new. Remember, amateurs built the Ark, professionals built the Titanic. My favorite story about trying something new is that I was asked to run for the Escondido Union School District Board of Education. Immediately, my first thought was, me? Are you sure? Me? I had no idea what this was about or what you did, but I did it because I love seeing innovative ideas being implemented in the classroom and knew that I could be a part of that on the board. So I did the work. I pulled my papers at the Registrar of Voters. I actually completed my papers right there on the spot, since literally I had 24 hours to get it completed because I was asked to run at the last possible minute. And when it was all said and done, I ended up with 2 opponents. So I walked the neighborhoods, I spoke to the community, and I bought 1,000 stamps for 1,000 postcards to be sent out. And I think you know the end of the story. I was elected. And the night I was sworn in, it all became a reality. And if you can see the look on my face, I was like, holy cow, what did I just do? I was actually scared. But as I repeated the oath of office, I came to realize that this was an honor to represent a community and to do what was right for kids, and that we were going to have fun doing it. So speaking of trying something new, I discovered this fun little quote online a couple of years ago, and it actually sits in my office. It's be brave enough to suck at something new. And brave equals bold, and to fail is okay, because we all learn through that suckiness. And rule number 2 is to treat others as you would want to be treated. And it's known as a golden rule, and it's an amazing rule. It's being courteous, and it's treating people. To apply it, you'd imagine yourself on the receiving end of the action in the exact place of the other person. We've all heard the term never burn a bridge, and to end, and that's to end a relationship in such a way that you could never go back across the bridge and restart that relationship. People who make a habit of burning bridges often wake up one morning wondering, where did everyone go? And I may have unintentionally burned bridges. However, I am aware and I know that I intentionally burned 2 bridges. And sometimes burning bridges isn't a bad thing. It prevents you from going back to a place you never should have been in the first place. And there are times where I've had a people leader make it so that it wasn't the right place to be. And then finally, think positive, act positive, and be positive. And most of all, smile. As I mentioned earlier, I recently placed my mother in an assisted care living facility. My brother and I had done the research. We found one of the best facilities in town to place her. And my mom's name is Nancy. And in the first few days, Nancy complained a lot. And I won't get into the details of what she complained about. However, it got to the point where I was getting more and more frustrated. And now I believe I know where the term negative Nancy comes from, my own mother. So on a particularly bad day last week, as I was getting ready to leave, I didn't want to leave completely frustrated with her. So I asked her, Ma, what is something positive that happened to you today? And she sat there kind of stunned. And I could see it in her face that she was thinking about it. And then she blurted out, I got a haircut today. And now I ask her every time I visit her, what's something positive that happened to you today? And now that I can tell, it's working, because just yesterday she only had one complaint and we had a great conversation, and her glass is slowly filling up with positivity. So my story ends with how it began, with an owl that is bold and possibly just a little scared. I just took this image this past Saturday evening out by the Salton Sea. So be bold and don't be afraid to step forward, as I did stepping off of that plane. Be hopeful, think of something good that's going to happen and work towards that. And how are you going to innovate? What is your passion? Do you have any new ideas? And make your life list. You can even use mine if you want. And then finally, find your joy, because life just isn't a straight line. There's valleys of despair and hills of success. So what is your personal mission and what is your North Star? And it's okay to be a little scared as you navigate your pathway through life. So thank you for letting me share my story with you. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And should I go ahead and stop sharing for now my screen, Erin?
That would be great. And if anyone else would like to turn on their camera, that's wonderful as well. We could ask questions. Paulette, that was wonderful. Very touching, and your pictures were spectacular, and your story is incredible. And I remember the 1990, or that's when I started teaching. I was right around that same time. So the time frame is amazing. Your story is inspirational, and how you stepped and how you are where you're at right now. And does anyone have any questions? People are mentioning gorgeous pictures. Thank you for the inspirational story. And I have a question. I'll start us off, but you're as a board member, and you've been a board member for quite a few years now with different organizations. And if you've seen things from an organizational perspective, and what advice would you give to leaders or teachers teachers are leaders, but different levels of educators that want to be inspirational and want to be visionary and want to be creative in their classrooms? What advice would you give them in stepping? And you gave a lot of steps, but within an organizational context, how do they approach their administrator, or how do they get to that next level? I saw your pivotal moment was when you had that pivotal moment when you worked with Jeff Felix, who is a visionary and inspirational, and that was your aha. How do they find those aha moments?
That's such a great question. And it's funny, as you were talking, and you were talking maybe from the leader standpoint, how do you work with people? And a lot of times, first of all, what I would suggest is I spend 80% of my time listening, and then 20% acting upon that, right? But as far as somebody wanting to innovate and, like I said, be bold, don't be afraid, because like I said, I always defer to that list. I mean, it's like I still have everything on the background. It's that solid foundation, because what's the worst that's going to happen? That's always my feeling, is like, what's the worst that's going to come out of this? And it's like, even when I became a board member for Escondido and was elected, I remember that first, right before my very first meeting, right after I was elected, I went to a board meeting. And I was sitting in the audience, and I was watching the board members and all the acronyms that were flowing out of there that I had no idea what they were talking about, because it's all educational language. And I thought I knew a lot, but then I had a lot more to learn. It scared me to death. And just sitting on that board, I think the first two meetings, I was very, very quiet and did a lot of listening, as I just said. And then I started to act upon that. So, but don't be afraid. Yes, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing, and you're going to learn from that. There's a couple times where open mouth, insert foot. Yeah, I think that would be my advice, hopefully. But always know that, like I said, think back to what's the worst that can happen, and you still have everything there for you in the end.
Any other questions from our group? I could ask her all questions all day long. And I'll ask one more because it's just intriguing. You were with an organization called Guru,
Mhm.
and that was a very innovative organization or business at the time. And could you explain that organization and what made them innovative and how they continued with their innovations? How they kept regenerating innovations?
Yeah, so Guru, oh my gosh, I completely forgot what their mission was because I'm like 5 years removed from that organization. But the founder and CEO of Guru was actually the gentleman that created Google Maps and Google Translate. And I learned so much working at that organization. We'd be traveling together with the CEO and I'd be using Google Maps and he'd just look over at me and go, "You're welcome." But I met some incredible people. I met board members from Google. But the organization itself was an OER platform. It was a platform for anybody that could go in and find resources and use those resources to build out courses and lessons for their students, completely free for anybody to use. But there was a ton of innovation behind that because it was considered kind of a startup, but it was a nonprofit startup. So we were constantly going after and looking and applying for grants and dollars to help support this. And the company still exists. It's still around. And I know that they've been building out quite a bit. They're navigating your pathway of learning is, I think, what it's all about. So, but again, it's a completely free resource, all tied to standards. Anybody can go in and start learning for free. Education is a human right. That was a mission. Education is a human right.
Yeah, and it's all about innovation and sparking creativity and
Mhm.
things like that. So no, and plus you were able to hang out with people from Google, which is all about
My
innovation and
gosh, that was so
having to
much
come up with new ideas all the time. So
fun.
that gives you a lot of background as well. So, well, thank you, Paulette. Is there any other questions from our audience? Quite a few of these people have been to all the other sessions as well, so it's been nice. And, well, thank you, everyone. And unless you have anything else to add, all right.
Well, thank you for having me today. I appreciate the time to share and I look forward to meeting everybody someday in person.